plan that was focusing on fragile states, a combination of ensuring a COVID response even under the most difficult of circumstances, but also to ensure that other life-saving health services would not be squashed in this process. We also have the UN socio-economic framework, and Robert will undoubtedly speak to that a bit more, which had a health component in it, but was really looking at the wider fallout, the wider implications of the pandemic in terms of economy, in terms of the fabric of society, etc. And what is straddling this is our WHO's component to both, and really aimed to ensure that the health response was there early on in an equitable manner to ensure that livelihoods were saved as well as lives. Next slide, please. Can you click more? Yeah. These planning frameworks have evolved. The socio-economic framework is now very much looking at the opportunities that this collective approach will bring towards a building back better, or as Robert often says, building back greener opportunity for countries, and the role that we as the UN family will and can play in support of our member states. In the humanitarian sphere, the normal planning process took over for 2020, so the COVID components are now part of the HRPs. And the SPRP evolved as well, and in particular at the bottom right of this slide you will see the component where we see the Act A partnership rolling out access to commodities, and of course Susanna and Peter will talk to the transversal component therein, strengthening health system capacity to do so. What you also see on this slide is a large number of partners, and when we were adding up the ones working with us within the health sector, we stopped counting when we reached 1,300 partners globally, at every level, global, regional, and country level. Next slide, please. The UN Crisis Management Team. So as I mentioned, this is the first time that a specialized agency is in charge of this mechanism that links the various entities that are concerned back to the leadership of our Secretary General. Very quickly after Dr. Tedros declared a fake on the 31st of January 2020, he requested the SG for activation of the crisis management team, and soon thereafter, on the 11th, we had the first meeting chaired by Mike Ryan as the global crisis manager. The aim of this group is to ensure that we are aligned, that everybody has the same information on the table, that we agree on priorities, and that where necessary, action is coordinated between the various agencies. The strong participation of both DCO, Robert Piper, and OCHA, Mark Lowcock, meant that this was also informing the other planning processes that I mentioned earlier. We have 23 participating entities, a large number of meetings, and I would like to draw attention to the last bullet point here, that our partner UNOCC during this period has provided 130 crisis updates to make sure that all UN entities are informed and aligned around our common purpose on this. And last but not least, a number of spin-off activities, so to speak, were triggered in the UNCMT. You heard last week about the COVID-19 supply chain system, which was born in the UNCMT but then created its own environment. But there was also a lot of work collectively, starting from the CMT, but later on led from New York on UN staff protection. Next slide, please. As an example, and you heard about this last week, so I'm not going to talk about the content per se, but just to show that when it came to the COVID-19 supply chain system, there was, first of all, many partners within and outside the UN. that this process is very much driven by the epidemiological and operational intelligence coming from WHO. So an understanding how the outbreak, how the pandemic was moving, when there were limited supplies available, where would they be best put to use, where were the biggest needs, etc. So a very strong spin-off from the UNCMT. Moving on, next slide please, to the humanitarian sphere. The sort of in tandem with the UNCMT, the IASC started weekly principal meetings, co-chaired by Mark Lowcock and Sophie Fold sitting next to me here. A lot of guidance came out, a lot of work went into safeguarding that financing for COVID was secured, but also financing for COVID wasn't going to eat into the financing for other life-saving activities. And most recently, a lot of work went into ensuring the availability and access and rollout of vaccines in humanitarian settings for people who would not be served under the national vaccine plans. The opportunity that is coming out of this, and that maybe Ryan or Sosa may want to talk to, is looking at possibilities to shock-proof, to ensure that countries in FCD settings are better prepared to come up with solutions, sustainable solutions for future shocks to their health systems. Next slide, please. One well-known component under the IAC is the Global Health Cluster. This one is led by WHO. We have 31 health clusters, 29 countries, 2 regional, total target audience of almost 84 million people. And the 3 examples that you see below shows how partners, both national and international, act in areas.
Of the WHO, the emergency program. A few more, and then of course COVID vaccine. So those 3 will be presented in the assembly. The 3 reviews will be presented in the assembly.
They have to be reported in the assembly.
Yes, sir.
So it's
Preliminary.
yes. World Health Assembly is going to be virtual only.
Yes, sir.
How many days?
Oh, so there was an update yesterday, but I did not get to see it. Let me refer. Very warm welcome to today's information session on COVID-19. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues from around the world, welcome as I mentioned. We have a session today, this session on the implementation of WHO Resolution 73.1. And no further ado, I'd like to take the opportunity of inviting the Director General, Dr. Tedros, for his opening remarks. DG, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tim. Your Excellency, Minister Vardhan, Chair of the Executive Board, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all Member States and yesterday's announcement by the United States of America that it will support a temporary waiver of intellectual property protections for COVID-19 vaccines is a significant statement of solidarity and support for vaccine equity. We're deeply grateful to the Biden administration for this decision to participate in negotiations at the World Trade Organization. We urge other member states and blocs to follow suit, and we hope that this decision will help to increase the global production and equitable distribution of vaccines. On Monday, the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo announced the end of the most recent Ebola outbreak reported in North Kivu. I congratulate the government, health workers, communities, and all that were involved in the response. This has only been possible thanks to a concerted, comprehensive, and consistent approach using vaccines and therapies. Empowered and engaged communities. COVID-19 is a very different the absence of any one of these key measures presents a weakness that this virus will exploit, as we are seeing all over the world. Around the world, cases of COVID-19 have increased for the 9th straight week, and deaths have increased for the 6th straight week. More cases of COVID-19 have been reported globally in the past 2 weeks than during the first 6 months of the pandemic. Over the last several weeks, countries in each WHO region have shown a sustained upward trend in cases and deaths. Now is not the time to let our guard down, even for countries that are now seeing declines in cases. Alongside vaccination, all countries must continue with a tailored and consistent application of the proven public health measures that have been the backbone of the response. Yesterday was the World Hand Hygiene Day, a reminder that clean hands save lives, especially at the point of care. And yet globally, water facilities lack hand hygiene resources at the point of care, and 1/4 of health facilities do not even have access to basic water services. A new WHO online monitoring portal will help member states identify and address gaps in hand hygiene. The economic benefits of hand hygiene are estimated at 16 times the cost. This is one of the single best investments in healthcare, which brings me to another of the best investments in healthcare: midwives. Yesterday was also the International Day of the Midwife. To mark the day, WHO, the UN Population Fund, the International Confederation of Midwives, and other partners published the 2021 State of the World's Midwifery Report, which shows that the world currently faces a shortage of 900,000 midwives. Fully investing in midwives by 2035 would avert roughly 2/3 of maternal and newborn deaths and stillbirths, saving 4.3 million lives per year. At the Assembly last May, member states passed a landmark resolution recognizing the leadership role of WHO and the role of the United Nations system in response to COVID-19. The resolution called on member states to implement a government and whole of society approach to ensure a more coherent, fair, and effective global response, including for a more equitable distribution of vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics. Member states also agreed that WHO should initiate an independent and comprehensive evaluation of the lessons learned from the international health response to COVID-19. Today, you will hear from the 3 groups that have reviewed the international response to the pandemic. Professor Dr. Lothar Wieler, Chair of the Review Committee of the Functioning of the International Health Regulations during COVID-19 response, Dr. Felicity Harvey, Chair of the Independent Oversight and Advisory Committee, and Dr. Anders Nostrom, the head of the Secretariat of the Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response. Finally, today, Dr. Mike Ryan and Dr. Oliver Morgan will brief you on the WHO Global Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence, which we announced with Germany yesterday. As always, we're grateful for your engagement and look forward to your questions and comments. I thank you. Tim, back to you.
Thank you very much, DG. Now we'll move to the first presentation. It's my pleasure to invite Professor Lothar Wieler, Chair of the Review Committee on the Functioning of the IHR during the COVID-19 response. Professor Wieler, you have the floor.
Thanks indeed, Your Excellencies. To bring to you the key findings of the IHR Review Committee, which has been working on this since the 8th of September. And I'd like to express my gratitude to Dr. Tedros for giving us this responsibility and trust. Before I give you some of the key elements that we found, I'd like to acknowledge the expertise and the experience of our really superb support by the IHR Review Committee Secretariat. And I'd also like to bring this to our fellow committee members. And I also wish to recognize my thanks for all the comments that have been delivered 8 months in various open meetings, because they were very valuable, and also the valuable contributions of the legal team, translators, WHO staff, and all the many experts that we actually interviewed. So if you move on to the next slide, please. Here you find the key messages in the report that has been published on the 5th of May of this year on the WHO website. There are 3 areas that we dived into pretty intensively, I have to say. Compliance and empowerment, early alert, notification and response, financing and political commitment. And this here in a nutshell is basically our findings. So it is clear that the lack of compliance of state parties with certain obligations under the IHR, this is a key element. It is various states which protected the global health emergency. Responsibility for is of utmost importance, as we found out. Therefore, we need a robust accountability mechanism for the evaluation and improving the compliance with IHR obligations, because this clearly would strengthen preparedness, international cooperation, as well as timely notification of important public health events. When we move to the second column here, the early alert notification and response area, it is clear that early alert is important for triggering timely WHO responses, notably to enable the Secretariat to use the power which is given to it by HR. And also, we found out that early response requires a better collaboration, coordination, and trust. And the word trust and collaboration, I think these are the two pillars that we must strive for more and more, whatever future threat will be there. Applying the precautionary principle in implementing travel-related measures could also enable early action to be taken against an emerging pathogen with pandemic potential. So the main goal of the IHR is health protection. And lastly, and this has been stressed several times by all the different research review committees that have worked on topics like on H1N1 or Ebola, an effective IHR implementation, of course, requires predictable and sustainable financing, both at the national as well as international level. And again, here it comes, the trust and collaboration. We need a new era of international cooperation to better support IHR implementation. So I just now highlight 3 areas in the next slide and the next 3 slides that we've gone through. So totally, we identified 10 different areas and we filed 40 different recommendations, but I don't want to, will not go into each of those, but here they are listed, and of course you can find them in our report. And today, I just want to concentrate on the legal preparedness, also the digitation, communication, and particularly the collaboration and coordination and financing, which is very, very important, and compliance and accountability. If you please move forward to the next slide. So this is a summary of the recommendations, a brief summary. The work was basically addressed by 4 different working groups. 3, we from the beginning introduced the preparedness, alert, and response work subgroups, because these are different areas. And when we went through each and every of the single articles of IHR, it is clear that these are 3 different tasks that have to be fulfilled. And the last group was only later than founded, the governance group, looking all over it again so that we didn't forget anything, and in particular, the global context was relevant here. So regarding the preparedness, I just want to highlight 2 issues here, which are in red. It is very important to build genomic sequence capacities, and I'd like to stress here that this is not only important for COVID-19, but of course also for other pathogens. And I'd like to stress here also the antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which is another threat, a silent pandemic that is going on since years and years and decades, and also there we need sound surveillance. And an issue that is very important, we found out, and this in contrast to various review committees before, there needs to be a better legal preparedness in some countries. Some countries don't have the legal framework to implement certain issues of the IHR, and this has to be soundly looked at in each and every nation to our findings. When we look at the alert aspects, particularly, we need a world alert and response notice with actions for response. This needs to be timely, automatically as much as possible. And again, this all again is based on trust and collaboration. And we also find that WHO should share more oftenly also unverified information if no response to verification requests from single countries is given. This is something that is possible under the IHR, but oftenly this puts a lot of pressure on WHO. But we think there may be times, and this should be a possible thing to do by WHO. When we look at the response issue, we found that in the IHR, the response topics are not addressed too strongly, and that's why we have another recommendation later. So what we see is that the state parties have to mandate WHO to proactively support individual state parties when the information about high-risk events becomes known to the organization. And WHO should be strengthened its operations and networks, which is very important, and of course it is based on. And we also found that the infodemic management is really a tough job to do, but actually also WHO should take this, and they need more resources to do it. When it comes to the governance issues, and these are two really pretty innovative as well as challenging recommendations that our committee filed. So we proposed a framework convention, some call it a global treaty or global convention, for the pandemic preparedness and response, and I will go into this in more detail later. And also we're proposing or recommending a universal periodic review, which is known from the UN humanitarian aspect, because this, to our findings, will strengthen the accountability of each and every country, because this is a government approach. But we think that this is needed when it comes to IHR implementation. Indeed, that was coming, each and every of the sessions, but a previous committee had implemented an intermediate level of alert when it comes to the alert announced by the DG. So there are pros and cons, and I don't want to go in too much detail about the pros and cons. It's written down in the report. I just want to make one issue, a point here. If you look at the cons, the first one is an intermediate level of alert would not address the broader challenges such as non-compliance and pressure not to declare. And I think this is a central finding. If we just have various levels of we don't see any indication that this would in any way better the compliance, improve the compliance. And this is, I think, a central finding. We have to live this alert, and we have to react from a countryside and from nations. And we need activity. We don't need just declarations. If you move to the next slide, please. And now I go from the review committee accepted which were established by the Human Rights Council in 26 for the 193 UN member states. It's an open, transparent, and participatory process, which we particularly like and stress, focused on systemic improvements. And it's an opportunity for states to demonstrate actions taken to improve their human rights situation and remind states of their responsibility to fully respect obligations. And it involves country reporting, independent organization. And as such, it seems to be very, very successful. And we talked about the states. In advance, it would be for a similar process for IHR, could foster the intersectoral collaboration of civil society engagement, and this is something we've clearly seen. This implementation of IHR didn't work in many countries, and it could help to improve the emergency preparedness and response, as well as the compliance with state parties' legal obligations under the IHR. And therefore, we are absolutely optimistic that this may help to link the implementation recommendations with the Sustainable Development Goals and other government agendas. Therefore, we recommend something like a universal periodic review regarding IHR. The next slide, please. And this is the recommendation for a framework convention. As I mentioned, it has been called Global Treaty or Global Convention on Pandemic Preparedness and Response. So the background here is that the IHR mostly concentrates on the detection, assessment, and alert provisions, as well as the preparedness for core capacities. However, other elements required for a comprehensive global architecture for emergency preparedness response fall outside the scope of the IHR. There's a possibility, because Article 57 of the IHR addresses the relationship of IHR with other international agreements, which can anticipate treaties. So we recommend to use it. And what could be parts of this global treaty or global convention? And I won't again go into all of the details. They are written down in our report, but again, in red I highlight those that we find most interesting and important. So we could manage better the risk of zoonotic diseases, and as you all know, the current COVID-19 pandemic is nothing else but another zoonotic disease. The offspring is a natural one from, most probably from bats. And it's not the first zoonotic disease we've seen. Remember Ebola. It needs a whole of government and whole of society coordinated action, which could be laid down in such a treaty. And the emergency response, we filed some particular important issues here. We need to openly, transparently, and rapidly share pathogens, genomic sequences. And I just want to remind you, it's not only about the existing. In addition, through the technology of mRNA vaccines from genome sequences, there is the possibility to directly identify protective antigens, which could lead to the development of vaccines as we've seen over the last 12 months. We have to put more cooperation to access to research and innovation. We need medical supplies and countermeasures, which are desperately needed, and convention could really path this before in advance. And also the global workforce and globally supply chains could be secured by such a treaty. And the last area which there's such a treaty it should be agreed on review processes and mutual accountability mechanisms. It should lead to the promotion of compliance in each and every country, and also there could be a clear prioritization of public health protection. I think this is like the country I come from, Germany, the public health response. It has been a public health crisis. Generous public health issues. And this is a lesson that we learned from this pandemic. And of course, there could also be laid down topics of protection of human rights and privacy. If you move to the next slide, I will end my presentation here. And if there's any questions or, no, please just go ahead. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take it. And again, I'd like to express my gratitude, also in the name of all my fellow committee members, that you, Dr. Tedros, gave me the chance.
Thank you very much, Professor Weiler, and we will have an opportunity for questions. I'm sure member states will have questions and comments that will follow the next two presentations. Now, my pleasure to introduce Dr. Felicity Harvey, Chair of the IOAC, the Independent Oversight and Advisory Committee. Dr. Harvey, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Excellencies and distinguished colleagues. Thank you for inviting me to share IOAC's findings and recommendations with you, and to exchange views in preparation for the upcoming World Health Assembly. And thank you also to Lothar for your excellent presentation just now. This is IOAC's 9th report to the WHO governing bodies, and it's based on the committee's work from May 2020 to April 21. and provides an update to our interim report on WHO's response to COVID-19 in May 2020 and our last report, the 4-year review presented to the World Health Assembly in November 2020. And similar to LOFAR, our report was published on the WHO website yesterday. What I'd like to do is present some of the highlights from that report, but there is also a lot more detail in the report itself, as you will see. For the purposes of this report, IOP aligned its oversight of the organisation's response to the global pandemic coronavirus COVID-19 with the terms of the resolution WHA 71.1 COVID response. The committee focused its review on WHO's leadership within the United Nations system in the global COVID-19 response, and we considered the effectiveness of WHO's efforts to support global pandemic prevention, preparedness and response. We examined the WHE programme's role and responsibilities as a major component of the organisation's response to COVID-19, and this was as requested within the resolution and of course is in line with our own committee's mandate. So we assessed the annual progress in WHO's work in outbreaks and emergencies, the transformation agenda, the WHE programmatic areas, measuring progress against the key performance indicators in our monitoring framework. And this report also indicates progress made against the milestones that were set out originally back in 2016 in the document A6930, which was presented to the Health Assembly in 2016 and outlined the design of the WHE programme. Our 9th report is longer than usual, and it contains a dedicated section on WHO's role in the global response to COVID-19, as well as WHO's response to multiple emergencies, the WHE programme in the context of the WHO transformation agenda, insecurity and other risks inherent to emergencies, as we've seen, the human resources of WHE programme and the programme's funding. Our report also includes an updated list of IOP recommendations and summarises the progress in their implementation. And in fact, a table outlining the detail of this will also be published on our website before the WHA. As regards COVID-19, WHO's ongoing response to COVID-19 pandemic, we note that the crisis has exposed failings in pandemic preparedness and response and a shortfall in health security and equality across the world. But at the same time, there have been numerous examples of global solidarity and collaboration, together with remarkable progress in research and development. The report concludes that despite the challenges, WHO has maintained and strengthened its leadership position in the global response throughout the pandemic. IOP cites the access to COVID-19 tools, the ACT Accelerator, and is a start of the unprecedented level of global collaboration and coordination, whilst noting that the ACT Accelerator has been hampered by limited production capacity of vaccines, inadequate funding, and insufficient political will and global solidarity to fulfil that ambition. And we reiterate in our report that the political and financial commitment of member states is fundamental to achieving the full potential of the ACT Accelerator. The committee is also concerned about the lack of a global plan to operationalise all the tools provided by the Accelerator in order to maximise their scope and impact. Hence, some of our recommendations that you will see in our report include WHO support member states in developing a global strategy to roll out the ACT Accelerator, operationalising the tools and maximising the impact with a public health approach to ensure fair and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. Also, that the international community addresses the supply chain constraints to ensure the equitable distribution of COVAX doses and guaranteeing investment with a view to reducing the socio-economic impacts of the global pandemic. And that the WHO Secretariat supports member states to fully implement all the public health measures and strengthen surveillance, monitoring and testing efforts in the light of the new variants of the virus. Turning to IHR, the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed shortcomings in the international health regulations and highlighted the primary role of member states in preparing for and responding to outbreaks and emergencies. We had very useful meetings with Lofar and his committee members before beginning our drafting, and our report endorses many of the IHR Review Committee's recommendations. For example, the establishment of a national legal framework to ensure implementation of the IHR and public health control measures, the introduction of a mechanism to foster accountability by all governments, strengthening of risk assessment, monitoring and data reporting and information sharing, importantly, empowering the role of national focal points, improving transparency and communication of temporary recommendations before a public health emergency of international concern is declared, and importantly, enhancing the WHO Secretariat's ability to fulfil its role through sustainable financing. However, IOC continues to be concerned that the broad binary nature of the fake mechanism doesn't provide a sufficient or actionable indication to member states of the nature or severity of epidemic or pandemic risks. I should say we find the pros and cons table that the IHR committee has put together extremely helpful. Whether through the fake or some other related process, it is crucial that WHO work with member states to improve and clarify risk assessments, corresponding alerts, and empowering IHR national focal points to take informed action. IOC further emphasises that temporary recommendations issued by emergency committees must be tied to a set of concrete actions and response measures. Moreover, member states should be held accountable through an appropriate mechanism for implementing recommendations in health crisis preparedness, readiness and response. And in regard to travel advice, IOC recommends that the role and impacts of the travel restrictions and other border measures, as well as international coordination of these measures, should be reviewed in preparation for the next pandemic. We also reiterate the previous recommendation that the Secretariat should further streamline the reporting process and review the existing tools and frameworks for national and international preparedness, including joint external evaluations and national action plans. IOC has noted the call to establish a new international treaty for pandemic preparedness and response so as to foster a comprehensive, multi-sectoral approach and strengthen national, regional and global capacities and resilience to further pandemics. Whilst recognising it is member states' prerogative, the committee suggests that such a treaty, or indeed framework convention, as IHR committee have said, should support member states to comply with the IHR to build national, regional and global resilience for pandemic responses, mobilise financial resources collectively and ensure universal access to diagnostics, treatments and vaccines for future pandemics based on the principles of solidarity, equity, accountability and transparency. You will see there is a lot of coherence here with the IHR committee's recommendation. We believe that stricter compliance with the provisions of the IHR, coupled with a stronger international solidarity, is of paramount importance in facing future pandemic threats. The committee therefore welcomes all efforts towards that end. The COVID response. IOC observes that the organisational-wide response to COVID-19 is coordinated through the WHE programme's incident management system. It therefore recommends that WHO review the current structure of and vision for the incident management structure to ensure it has adequate capacity, resilience and sustainability. We also recommend strengthening WHO country offices to empower them to lead the public health response to COVID-19 at country level within the United Nations system. The WHO Secretariat has increased its surge capacity in response to the global pandemic by leveraging the whole organisation under the leadership of the Director General. IOC recognises that the WHO programme is leading the core science work on COVID-19 and recommends that WHO further strengthen core technical expertise capacity by ensuring adequate staffing within the WHO programme at headquarters level, whilst continuing close collaborations with external expert groups and expanding partnerships. IOC notes that the human resources planning for the WHO programme has never been fully implemented, mainly due to insufficient funding. Findings from a survey with WHO country office representatives confirms that the 2016 emergency reform and the establishment of the WHO programme have increased WHO country offices' ability to manage health emergencies, but the human resources capacity remains weak. IOC recommends that WHO programme country business model be revised and adjusted for country-specific requirements with priority on fragile states, in line with the Regional Human Resources Plan. And IOC reiterates the principle of a single human resources plan for the WHO programme, which should be under the responsibility of the programme's executive director. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in total or partial disruption of essential services in fragile, conflict-affected and vulnerable settings. IOC recommends increasing current investment in resilient health systems and universal health coverage as delivery of an essential package of health services with sustainable funding is a key priority. With regards to communication, IOC is deeply concerned by the high level of toxicity and incivility on social media against WHO and its staff members. The committee strongly condemns personal attacks against the Director General and WHO staff members. We recommend that WHO build further capacity to deploy proactive countermeasures against misinformation and social media attacks, but also further invest in risk communication as an essential component of epidemic management. I would say that what we have seen that's been developed is very good, but it needs further investment. With regard to health emergencies, in keeping with the IOC mandate, we've also reviewed WHO's performance in other emergencies. We observe that the expectations of WHO's role have increased hugely since 2016, as has the scope of the organisation's work in both acute outbreaks and humanitarian crises. The WHE programme has been at the heart of WHO's response to COVID-19, playing a pivotal role in global coordination whilst managing other concurrent emergencies. The two current Ebola virus outbreaks in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has just ended, and Guinea, have proved the WHO programme's capability and commitment to lead frontline emergency operations in the midst of a pandemic. Whilst the WHO programme is not a standalone entity, and its success depends on operational support systems and other programmes, IOC recommended in its previous reports that WHO programme's managerial authority and autonomy be protected against politicisation, and urges the Global Policy Group to institutionalise the implementation of the managerial authorities, accountabilities and processes that have already been agreed in order to and sustainability of funding for the WHO programme be improved and a wider donor base. In our previous reports, IOP has repeatedly recommended that an increased proportion of WHO core flexible funding should be allocated to the WHO programme. And we emphasise once again that WHO corporate core flexible funding is fundamental to building the programme's capacities, because such funding provides ability for staffing. In the longer term, the committee believes that further discussion should take place among member states to review whether WHO has the strategic capacity and support to support country preparedness and response, and whether WHO's funding is adequate for the WHO programme to lead multi-dimensional and large-scale emergencies like the COVID-19 pandemic alongside an increasing number of graded emergencies that it routinely manages. In conclusion, we assess that WHO has maintained and strengthened its leadership position in the global response to the pandemic, while concurrently managing 65 graded emergencies over 2021 period. IOP will continue to hold WHO accountable, but urges member states and partners to play their part as well. The way forward, therefore, undoubtedly lies in greater global solidarity and stronger multilateral cooperation in order to increase global capacities for preparedness, readiness, and response to health emergencies. In a global pandemic, solidarity becomes more than a matter of moral principle. It's the key to success in controlling the virus, as no one is safe until everyone is safe. The world looks to the WHO for guidance, and the organisation must now scale up its efforts to bring the ongoing pandemic under control. However, success is the responsibility shared between member states, WHO partners, and the Secretariat. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harvey. Now for the third presentation in this suite of presentations under the agenda item. It's Dr. Anders Nordstrom, Head of the Secretariat of the Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response. Anders, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tim. I will be brief, as I'm not going to present the findings and recommendations of the report today. That will come next week. But I will share with you what will come and when will it come. Next slide. So the panel has now concluded its work. The panel was established as a consequence, or as a move by the Director General in response to the WHO recommendation then now almost a year ago, where that resolution then requested the Director General then to initiate an independent, impartial and comprehensive evaluation of international health response, and then he took the decision then to establish this panel. The panel has then worked now for 8 months, 2 co-chairs and 11 panelists, and next slide. Next slide, we can go all the way through. The panel committed to quite an ambitious program of work next month, and I can report that that work has now been completed. And the panel will be ready now to report on this next one as well. Both in terms of the findings, what the panel has been able to, next slide, through interviews, through roundtables, through broader open, what we call exchanges, webinars with a range of different stakeholders, captured in those background papers that has been done both by the panelists and the Secretariat together with expert input, and a couple of them commissioned to individual institutions. And then through the submissions we have got over the webpage, we have got over 140 individual submission contributions, ideas across the world. And through also briefings, where we both briefed about the work, but also listened very carefully to what people have asked and suggested. Next slide. Those are the roundtables, and they're actually 15, not 18, as was said in the other slide. Roundtables at different topics. Big picture discussion about what should be the future of the international system. Discussion about WHO financing. Discussion about access to supplies. How we've moved from science to policy. access to vaccines, 2 different seminars about the socioeconomic impacts, both with regional partners and global partners, space on the 28 country studies that the panel has conducted, a specific seminar around therapeutic and diagnostics, then a couple of discussions around issues that cuts across generation, slightly older generation and the younger generation, a special roundtable around human rights, communities, communication, and then a discussion with a number of mayors to talk about local government and what we can do more at the local level, working across sectors, private sector, and then finally one around digital solutions. Next one. So what will come now next week is a package of material. Next slide. It's a combination, as I said, of both capturing what we've been able to learn and to see and to listen to, and then what the panel is then drawing in terms of conclusions and recommendations. So there will be a main report that will be available through an embargoed pre-briefing on Monday. I will come to that in a second. And then the actual report on Wednesday next week. It will be available then in English on Wednesday, and then on the 20th of May in all the other UN languages. It will both be available as a PDF, as an interactive online report. Then there will be a summary also available now on Wednesday in all 6 UN languages. In support of the main report, there will also be something we have called the 13 defining moments, looking back a year, recognizing that we are still in the middle of this crisis, but still some interesting moments that happened that had an impact on what actually on where we actually are today. Then we will also publish then specifically and separately what we call the chronology, where there has been a detailed review and capturing of what actually happened during the first 4 months of this outbreak, both when it comes to report on the virus, new science, policies and guidelines made, and what national response actually happened. And then, as I said, 16 background papers. Next one. This is just an outline of what I think, if I should advise you what to read, the most exciting part of our report, which is more sort of giving the story about looking back, written, I think, in quite a nice way, and with a lot of detailed references in terms of the facts behind. Next one. Then the background papers are covering quite a wide range of issues. The first one is about looking back to the past. What can we learn from 16 previous panels and commissions? The chronology, it will be both the timeline published and then a summary paper summarizing what are then the main findings based on that chronology. There will be 2 separate papers based on the 28 country studies. There are 2 papers that we have commissioned to institutions, one on the economic impact and cost and one on the social cost. Then there will be 1 paper understanding how science led to policy, then one on vaccines and diagnostic and therapeutics, then a separate paper that we also commissioned to an expert, addressing a lot of the issues that are at hand today in terms of IP, what is possible to do in terms of legal framework to be able basically to produce and to scale up vaccines. Essential supplies. Then there's a paper also on the impact of essential health services that goes beyond COVID-19. What can we say? What do we know in terms of what has been the impact of people's health and health services and the disruption of health services this far? The paper about community involvement, paper around communication, a paper about some institutional aspects of WHO, a separate paper around international treaty and conventions, which is more of a fact paper. It's not so much of an opinion paper, but providing the facts, looking at, I think, 20 different other treaties and conventions, and then a deep dive into the climate architecture, what is available there in terms of the climate convention, and what can one potentially learn from that. A paper also on international financing that we have commissioned, and the same thing, a paper on human rights that has also been commissioned and used in one of the round papers. The chronology, what we have done is try to be as factual as possible to document when were reports made about cases, when did different actors take action, when were guidelines made. And this is a very detailed chronology, basically going day by day, almost hour by hour. And it will be available as, in some way, piece of global public goods. This is the best that we've been able to do, thanks to inputs from experts across the world, including from WHO, including from interviews with also key stakeholders in China for the first months of what happened. And again, that will be published on Wednesday, next month. So what is happening now is that there will be embargoed pre-briefings for member states on Monday. We have 3 time slots available, invitations have gone out. There will be interpretation in all 6 languages. The report will not be available then. This will be an oral briefing, so that member states are aware about what are the findings and what will come in the main report. Then the public presentations and the report becoming available will happen then on Wednesday next week. And then the formal presentation, go back just once. The formal presentation will happen then at the World Health Assembly on May 25th. And the panel will be available now then in between the 12th and 25th. And that's the whole idea by publishing it then of course, to be able to respond to questions, to provide additional briefings, and potentially to begin to discuss. But the main discussion and interventions and reactions from member states ought to take place at the Assembly session then on the 25th. As I said, the full package what you see there will be published on Wednesday next week. The summary in the 6 languages and the main report also in the additional 5 languages coming then on the 20th of May. Next and final one. If you'd like to register for Monday and you haven't received the invitation, has gone to the Ministers of Health across the world. If you have not received it and you would like to receive it and your minister would like to participate or somebody's standing in for her or him, please send a message then to our secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nordstrom, Head of the Secretariat for the IPPPR. With that, now time to hand over for member states. I'm sure you have questions and comments to our 3 panelists. I would like to invite June Ossai from the Department of Governing Bodies to moderate the session. Over to you, please, Jude. Member states, please raise your hands as per the usual protocol. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I recognize the United Kingdom. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for this it's hugely welcome. The presentations are very clear and succinct. And I also just know that we've asked many times for the reports to be made available in good time to enable us to consider them as in the build-up to the World Health Assembly. And clearly you've delivered on that front. So thank you for hearing us on that one and sharing such insightful analysis at this stage. From the kind of initial analysis we've done, we really welcome the findings and conclusions of this, which are clearly based on a huge amount of extensive evidence, as well as the deep expertise that the different panels and committees and commission have brought to these processes. And I should also mention, rest assured that the recommendations will be immediately useful, not least as we gather again as member states discuss WHO. But also as we begin discussions of a possible decision relating to a framework convention on pandemic preparedness and response in the coming days. Just in terms of questions, one quick clarification for Anders, if possible. I think we were under the impression that an embargoed copy of something would be available, embargoed copy of either the executive summary or something would be available on Monday. But is it correct that actually Monday is just presentations for ministers and officials, and then Wednesday is the first time we'll receive an actual document? And then the more kind of substantive question, I guess, across all three panels, committees, is the pandemic's ongoing, clearly, and indeed is in one of its most intense and acute phases right now. So I just wonder, what was your cut-off date for evidence to feed into these reports? And I'd also be really interested in your views on whether it's whether essentially looking at what you've looked at until now kind of suffices for now, or whether actually the fact that there has had to be a cut-off date and that we continue to grapple with the pandemic globally means that some or all of these processes should be continued beyond the World Health Assembly. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, United States. I recognize the UK, my apologies. I recognize the European Union to be followed by the US. European Union, you have the floor, please. European Union, may I kindly ask you to unmute? Thank you. European Union, you have the floor, please. Ambassador, we can, please proceed.
And the IHR chairs and the secretariat of the IPPR for their presentations today, as well as to the GPMB for its report, which was published earlier this year. We wish to express our sincere appreciation to them and their panel and committee members for their sterling efforts to help the member states better respond to this and future pandemics in so many ways. We are all taking careful note of your valuable recommendations as we continue our response to this pandemic and our preparedness for future pandemics. Then, as you know, the leaders of 26 countries from all regions recently called for a pandemic treaty to avoid the world having to go through another pandemic in the future. On behalf of these 26, the group of friends of the treaty, we appreciate that the IOAC, the IHR Review Committee, and the IPPR gave serious consideration to this call and even proposed elements to be considered in such a treaty. I am happy to announce that a group of friends last night circulated a proposal for a procedural decision for adoption by the Assembly, creating an inclusive and transparent process that should lead us collectively to a consensual agreement on a treaty. We look forward to discussing this proposal with you in informal consultations next week. I thank you.
Thank you very much, European Union. I should now like to invite the United States of America. You have the floor, please.
Today, and I would like to join others who have thanked all of the presenters today, but all of the people that stand behind them who have put in countless hours to bring us the information and the findings that you did in all three of the reports. And I think that we've been working in step with you to try to stay in step with you as you've gone through your deliberations. And the clarity and the crosswalk between the different groups is really helpful. I think that we believe that there is a lot of information that you offer us, and we would like to definitely have the time before the assembly, but I think we look at the time after this assembly as absolutely essential to be able to let member states have that time to really go through your reports and your recommendations in an in-depth and very deliberate way. And so we're really looking forward and trying to work with other member states, particularly and make the most of the recommendations given us. And so you've really delivered for us, and I hope that over the next period, we will be able to deliver back for you. And so with that, I think that we have some reservations at this point about embarking on negotiations around a pandemic treaty. I think that we think that over time, that could in fact be an instrument and a tool that we need, but we'd actually like the time to go through your recommendations and match recommendation to consensus to instrument and tool. And so I just want to put that out there because I think it's an important, I just think it's important to be able to put all the ideas on the table at this point, and just really appreciate each of the bodies for the information that you've given us. You've really worked tirelessly, and we recognize that. And just want to say again, thank you. We hope that we can be good partners on the receiving end. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you very much, United States. May I now give the floor to Germany? You have the floor.
Thanks expressed by my colleague from the United Kingdom for the early presentations of these findings and indeed publication of already 2 of the 3 reports. Very much appreciated. As Germany, we are also, of course, very happy about the clear language on the possible positive impact of a new framework, of a pandemic treaty, as it's called sometimes, as well as on a peer review mechanism on pandemic preparedness that would increase not only accountability among member states, but also cooperation and solidarity. And finally, my question also goes in similar lines as what my colleague from the UK and US have said, which looks a bit towards the future. And what would you recommend as a follow-up mechanism when it comes to the expert side? I don't remember which panel said that this evaluation exercise has been new in the sense that it happens still in the middle of the pandemic or of the event which it's going to, it's supposed to evaluate. So what would you recommend how your expertise can continue to feed in what will be, of course, an ongoing discussion among member states? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Germany. May I now invite Monaco Ambassador, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Julie. And I would also like to thank all of the panelists, as well as the members of the committee, for all of this work that has been undertaken. There has been an enormous amount of work that has been done in the past few months, and I would like to thank you very much for the reports that have been presented. They are very complete. We will need a lot of time to be able to look through them. I would also like to ask the Secretary to make sure that we have them available in the 6 official languages of the WHO as quickly as possible, and not only just summaries, but the entire reports. That way we can really work on these reports. I would also like to echo what was said by the United Kingdom and Germany about what we should do in the next few months. We are going to establish a working group. We are also going to look at the issue of a potential treaty. However, I would like to know how the different chairs of the committees and panels, commissions foresee cooperation with member states in these next few months in the follow-up to these reports. We'd be very interested to hear what they have to say about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I see no further requests for the floor, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, for those questions and comments. What I intend to do is to ask each of the panelists to respond to the questions that were raised. However, before I do so, I understand there is another member state wishing to take the floor. Is that correct? Thank you, Jude. Could you please...
My apologies, Chair. I recognize Chile. Chile, you have the floor.
take advantage of the interpreters and I'm going to speak in Spanish. Chile quiere agradecer.
So we would like to thank you very much for the presentation and the summary of the report of all the different committees and panels. We are very grateful for these presentations. We are pleased with what we have seen in the summary. You have taken into account many of the initiatives that the states have presented during this process. And we would also like to highlight the initiative that Chile, as well as other states, co-sponsored. We presented a document of different activities that we thought should be reassessed, and we are very pleased that this activity has been undertaken. We would also like to mention, just as the European Union and other member states said, we would like to thank you very much for the efforts that were undertaken in this international pandemic treaty. You also mentioned the group of friends, the 27 countries that are friends of the treaty. We are very pleased that there's a decision that will be taken on this potential pandemic treaty during the WHA, and we look forward to negotiating with the rest of the member states. We are very thankful that the WHO has taken on board all of these recommendations. We would also like to know a little bit more about how you envisage the future regarding this pandemic treaty, since the pandemic is still underway. Will there be a continuous evaluation of the pandemic, or will there be another process that will be initiated? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chile. I recognize China. You have the floor, please. China, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. And great during this briefing, and we would like to ask one: is the difference between the main report and the background papers, and who are the who's going to publish all the background paper, and what's the relationship between them with the main reports, and how will they be published? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna. It appears we had a slight challenge here in your first question. Could you kindly identify which of the three speakers you are addressing your question to? Would it be the IPPR Secretariat?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. Chair has no further requests.
Thank you very much to Chile and China for those questions and comments. If I could then go back to the panelists, and what I indicated I would like to do is give the floor first to Professor Wheeler to respond to the questions that were raised, including, I think, for all panelists, the issue around what does the future look like from your perspectives. Professor Wheeler, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions and comments. In particular, of course, I'd like to express my gratitude for the appreciation of the work that my committee members have done, as well as other members of the committees from the other two groups. It has been an interesting but challenging month that we have gone through, not only because of the pandemic. To answer the question, from my understanding, the most important question is regarding the future, and from my understanding, the most important issues that we have to tackle is solidarity, is equitable health access. We have to share vaccines as much as possible, because the sooner populations all over the world are vaccinated, the sooner we will be able to control this pandemic. The same is true when it comes to access to treatment or oxygen. We need to set up really the access to those needs that are basically needed all over the world. And an issue that I'd also like to tackle is travel management. It would really be helpful if countries could come along with a similar travel management to make it more acceptable and understandable and manageable by all the people of the world who need to travel. It would really be great if there could be some consistency and harmony in about which issues and which reasons we would have to have a travel ban or not a travel ban. And I think these are the main issues that I'm concerned about, because in terms of what will come and which wave will pop up in whatever country, nobody knows this, but I'm feeling that the different pace at which certain countries now are opening, reopening, closing, there need to be clear indicators why this is done or why this is not done. And it would be really great if the world and most of the countries would be able to exchange these indicators and build up trust, because otherwise this will be very disruptive. And the last point that I want to make is, and this has been very often stressed by Dr. Tedros, and I can only echo this, vaccine nationalism or therapy nationalism or oxygen nationalism, nothing of these will bring us to a brighter future. That's basically what I have to say.
Thank you very much, Professor Wheeler. Now I'd like to hand the floor to Dr. Harvey, Chair of the IOAC.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for all of your comments from colleagues in the different countries. And could I also just utilise this moment to say thank you to all of my colleagues on the IOP as the other members. A huge appreciation to all of the work of the other panels. As you know, the work of IOP, which was set up some years ago, is ongoing. So in response to the question by the UK, USA and Germany and the EU, we actually will be continuing to look at the response, the data, how well things are being taken forward as part of our ongoing work since our term goes on till May 2016. So we will be continuing to follow the pandemic and how things have been done within our mandate. I would also, though, like to echo Lothar's comments, because we are far from at the end of this pandemic, and the importance of global solidarity and support for vaccine equity and some of the socioeconomic disparities that we've seen over the last year and continue and will continue are incredibly important. And that is only going to be able to be overcome by the global solidarity that is going to be so important to be with us. So I think those were the only particular questions to me, but I thank you also for your statements around the support for all of us and actually specifying that we'll be going through our report. And I should just clarify, it's to May 2022 that our term as IOC goes on to. Many thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Harvey, and now Dr. Nordstrom. Thank you.
Thank you. All our documentation will be published on Wednesday next week, not on Monday. So there will be oral presentation with all the details in terms of findings and recommendations, but orally only, and embargoed on Monday. All the documents, both the main report, the defining moments and background papers, will be available on the webpage of the independent panel. There will also be a link at the WHO webpage to the main report as an INTDoc, where you could also then find it. And as I said, the translation of the main report will be done, as far as I understand, the 20th of May. I can't say anything about the future. I'm not the co-chair of a panel. I'm just the secretariat. But the task and of the independent panel comes to an end now. I know that the co-chairs, they would of course be available to advise if that would be desired. I can more say on a personal basis, to have had this kind of, or work with this kind of more independent group that stands outside politics has been quite interesting, and I hope you will find it useful when you see the report next week as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anders. I note that we are 5 minutes from 2 o'clock, which was the scheduled end time for today's meeting. We still have the agenda item on the Global Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence. I wonder if we could have a very brief introduction to that presentation, and if Member States you are willing, we could go an extra 10-15 minutes to manage this last agenda item. If there are no objections to that, I hand the floor to Dr. Mike Ryan for an update. Over to you, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And just recognise, in addition to Oliver Morgan, you have Associate Fellow Joanne Major, Marie Van Kerkhoff, Sylvie Brion, and Tim Nguyen here, who've been working in this space in particular. Thanks to Bernard Schwarzander for all his help and assistance in initiating and moving this project forward. Dr. Tedros has been relentless in his moves within WHO, and always saying that if you change nothing, nothing changes. To shift our mindsets, to focus on solving problems together. I don't know how many times he uses the words together. Transformation, not only in how we do things, in what we do, but who we do it with. In that sense, the project we're presenting today and the WHO Hub in Berlin builds on that ethos, builds on that mindset. It is built on the shoulders of many projects that have been existing, like the EIOS projects, BioHub, EpiWin, GORN, GISTRIS, EIOS, EMTs, and GISTRIS. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Oliver Morgan to present the project. This hub aims to bring together partners from all over the world to develop better access to data, to develop better analytic tools to generate the insights we need during, before, during, and after epidemics and pandemics, but also to build the communities of practice, to share and transfer capabilities, to build trust between partners. And we very much thank and are extremely grateful to the German government for their untiring support to WHO, to the Emergencies Programme, and in particular for providing the platform on which we can all build better data, better analytics, better insights, and better decisions for public health before, during, and after health emergencies. Oliver.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. In the interest of time, I'll just touch on 3 slides and we'll just very quickly through and see if there are any questions for us to address here. So, as mentioned in the IHR Review Committee, there were a number of areas where further work is needed collectively, and certainly in the area of public health intelligence, epidemic and pandemic intelligence, we need to work together much more. Here we have a quote from the first report of the IHR Review Committee, that we need more meaningful cooperation during and in between health emergencies, more transparency, more regular detailed exchange of real-time data and experiences at all levels, more reliability of interaction. I think that came through very clearly from all 3 of the reviewed reports. The Hub for Pandemic Epidemic Intelligence will really focus on 3 broad areas. The first is increasing the availability and linkage of diverse data. The second is the development of tools and predictive models for risk analysis. And the third is the monitoring of disease control measures and infodemics. To do that, the Hub will work across 4 broad thematic groups as part of WG, working with our member states and partners, accelerating existing initiatives, as Dr. Ryan mentioned, but also attracting innovations for new work, strengthening the technology foundations and data framework as we know, based in Berlin, but also work closely with capacities in the local ecosystems, such as the Robert Koch Institute, but also working with member states in the global ecosystem to ensure that we're delivering on demand-driven innovation so that they're really meeting the needs at the member state level, but also of partners at the global level. In brief, just to wrap up, the hub is part of WHE and supporting all aspects of the work that we do in emergency preparedness and response. Its focus is very much demand-driven to meet the needs of member states and WHO at all the levels of WHO. The intent is to really attract global expertise, to add value to the existing work that we do, but also to develop new programs of work that are needed. We aim that the hub will work in flexible ways, both in its structure and its ability to interact with different types of expertise from around the world. And the hub will also rely on predictable core funding, initially provided by the German government, but also to attract additional resources for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oliver. And just also recognizing that Berlin is very much become a center for innovation in this space, not only in health, but in artificial intelligence and data and analytics and others. So we really will be beginning to leverage ongoing efforts there, but across the world. And particular thanks to our technical partners in Berlin, the Lothar Wieler and the people at the Robert Koch Institute, the Charité with Christian Dostan, and many, many others. And this will build on their developing capacities as well. And obviously thanks to Lothar, who chairs the IHR Review Committee, runs the RKI, supports the national response, and is also engaged in driving innovation in this space. My thanks, personal thanks to him for his leadership and support during this process.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you very much, Oliver, for those quick comments and introduction to the new Global Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence. Jude, over to you if there are any member states who would like to raise a quick question. We have a few moments left with the indulgence of member states to finalise this item. I do also understand that there are some materials we can distribute to member states following this session on the hub, which will provide further information. So Jude, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. It doesn't appear that member states would like to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Jude. Well, once again, I'd like to really thank our three presenters today from the various review panels, Dr. Lothar Wieler, Dr. Felicity Harvey, Dr. Anders Nordstrom, the Secretariat, of course, for responses and an update on the WHO Global Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence. On behalf of the Director General, I would like to thank you for joining today and thank you for extending your time in a very, very busy period, I know, and I look forward to our next meeting. With that, I wish you a very good afternoon, evening, night, and early morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.